Thank you, Director Young. We will now begin the question and answer session. I'll start yielding myself 5 minutes. I'm not trying to trap you. I'm not trying to stump you, but I'm going to go straight to the numbers here. This is the President's budget, and I'd like to walk through some of the figures that are in here. I'm not suggesting you've memorized this, but in summary, table number 1, what is the 10-year average of spending as a share of the economy?
Mr. Chairman, in next year, so the 2024 budget, our outlays are projected to be $6.9 trillion, about 25% of GDP.
Okay, thank you. So you've answered correctly, and I appreciate the transparency. That almost 25% of GDP in spending over the 10 years is the highest sustained level in America's history. Now, if you look at OMB's historic table 1.3, the summary of receipts, outlays, and surpluses or deficits, the federal government spends in every year as a share of GDP more than any year dating back to the invasion of Normandy, pre-COVID. It's not a year where in every year of the budget, we're not spending more as a percentage of GDP than any and every year pre-COVID all the way back to World War II. Do you know that to be true and believe that to be correct?
Mr. Chairman, I haven't seen that analysis, but I will take your analysis and for fact, and happy to look at it after the hearing.
Thank you. I think just about every economist on the left or right, and I certainly recall Larry Summers briefing a group of bipartisan members of Congress where he talked about the overflowing bathtub of federal monies, stimulus monies, flooding the marketplace and igniting what has now been 15 consecutive months of 40-year high inflation. I think the cumulative inflation increase is about 15% since the president took office. Do you agree, while there are monetary policy factors, and I'm certain others, that spending is one part of the problem that has created this record inflation that our working families are struggling with today?
Mr. Chairman, I think the largest part of the inflation story is economies coming out of pandemics. That is why we've seen inflation around the globe. So it's not one bill passed by the United States Congress, but supported by the president. When you've seen inflation levels like we've seen them in the UK and France, what explains that? It tells us the pandemic, supply chain shortages, shipping companies, lack of competition certainly had a larger role.
Do you think spending has any role?
It absolutely can. I think it had a small role given what we've seen over the global economy.
What I would tell you is most economists on the left, advisors to Democrat presidents, have said it plays a significant role. And there were warnings. Don't spend $2 trillion, for example, in ARPA monies when $1 trillion remained unspent. Work with Republicans, find out where there are targeted needs, but don't flood the market with trillions of dollars in more spending. It's the old saying, when you're in a hole and you want to get out, the first thing you have to do is stop digging. But my concern is year over year, just on discretionary. I recognize that the longer term's more directional and visionary and aspirational, but next year's discretionary proposal is almost $100 billion more than last year. It's hard to understand when people are having to tighten their belts, they're changing their spending habits, they're struggling to make ends meet, and the president is asking not just for the $2.5 trillion in mandatory spending and all the things we've talked, but next year, $100 billion more in spending. Let me get to my last point, and I'll yield to my colleague. I'm from a border state. We are struggling and suffering with lawlessness and chaos like we have never seen. And everybody's overwhelmed. Border Patrol's overwhelmed. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Schools are overwhelmed. And the whole country is struggling with the flood of crime, gangs, and especially the drugs. Over 100,000 Americans have died last year, and it seems to only be getting worse. The president, with all due respect, and his Secretary of Homeland Security says, the border's secure. My people in Texas, and I'm certain because of the effects, the pervasive effects of the open border on all states, I suspect people across the country find that not just hard to believe, but insulting to say the border is secure. Maybe embracing open border policies and just accepting that as the policy and saying that's what I believe is the best for the country, that's different. But saying it's secure is insulting. But the budget, when you think about safety and security being the first and most important priority of the government, providing a common defense, you mentioned the investment in the military. The president's budget cuts Homeland Security by $600 million. So here we are in this unprecedented border crisis. I can report from my state, direct impact in my communities, in my district. And the president says we need 2,400 new EPA employees, 20% increase in EPA, but $600 million less for Homeland Security. I'm gonna just let you finish with my Q&A with an answer to that, because I don't know that there's gonna be an answer that's going to satisfy
I hope
my
it
folks.
does. I hope it does, because we agree with you. We have to have, from a funding perspective, and not everything can be fixed with money, but in the border, we recognize more money is needed. We asked for money in December. We got a little over half. So we hope to partner and do a bit better than getting half of our budget request. We're asking for close to 9%, Mr. Chairman, an increase in DHS, about $6 billion. TSA passenger fees are treated differently in 23 than 24, and that accounts for the majority of the difference you cite. Apples to apples, budget authority to budget authority. The Department of Homeland Security would receive 6% more with the passenger fee change alone. If you give us credit for the $5 billion almost we're asking for the Border Search Fund, which I think should count because it's money we're asking for, that goes up to a 9% increase. So I hope that's a place we can work together.
Well, I will not bogart the time. I've resented some of my chairmen in the past who continued this dialogue without giving my colleagues the opportunity. I would respectfully disagree with the characterization of investing in border security, but I appreciate your response. Now,